Thank you, Eric, for those songs. Those worked very well as far as preparing, at least my mind, for the things I've prepared and for a lot of the themes we'll be touching on. I'll also begrudgingly thank Andy for asking me to lead this lesson this morning. This is, quite frankly, not my wheelhouse. I am much more comfortable being in a small back room teaching a few of you where we get to share and studying God's Word together. I'm not a lecturer. So I will take the right of cutting this short whenever I need to. But as we're approaching this lesson, Andy mentioned, kind of jokingly, pick something light and jolly for the season. This exactly isn't jolly or light, but it is on theme and it is timely for this time of year. Some of the things to be considering as we're going through this, as the songs have already indicated, a lot of this will be focused on us as priests, and what that actually looks like, and how does that apply to our covenant. And it's obviously different than that of the Israelites. To frame that, we'll look at first very briefly at man's original purpose, and through that lens, see how that plays out into our lives today. And then look at this idea of the kingdom of priests, what that actually looked like, what that meant, what was God's intended purpose when he called his people to be this. And then close with the veil being torn and all that had to do with and what Christ accomplished and how that connected to man's original purpose. So, going very back to the very beginning, we'll go to Genesis chapter 1. If you want to turn there, Genesis chapter 1. And I just realized you also get a sneak peek of what I'll look like in 30 years. Or you might say just right now. But in Genesis chapter 1, we'll start in 26 to get the context. And then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and in the birds of the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit within seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all to the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. Jumping ahead to chapter 2, we'll add this in addition to round out the context. Chapter 2, starting at verse 15. "And the Lord took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And the Lord commanded the man, 'You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat it, you will certainly die.' Then the Lord said, 'It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him.' Now the Lord had formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds of the sky. He brought them to the man to see what he would name them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds of the sky, and all the wild animals, but for Adam no suitable helper was found. So the Lord caused man to fall asleep deep sleep, and while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and enclosed it the place where flesh. Then the Lord made a woman through the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man." Some key elements here to draw from the passage: that man is made in God's image. That was the intended purpose. He was unique, he was separate, he was distinct from all of the creation in this one fact. We also see that God gave him a purpose and he gave him law. He made him so that he would work and rule. That he would both have a submissive role, but also have dominion, which was unique. None of the other animals or creation shared in this. And then Adam, at least in the second passage, it highlights the fact that he was given the privilege of naming the animals. Now, to us, it's maybe a throwaway passage, but from a Jewish perspective, once you name something, you own it. Adam didn't create any of these. And yet, shortly after creating them, God gives Adam the immense honor of naming his creation. It's a privilege. And if I were to summarize our original ultimate purpose as mankind, high level, stepping back, just looking at this text, if I were to summarize it, mankind was designed for working in a garden alongside our Creator and sharing in his reign And that's it. Very simple, very basic. It has a lot of depth to it, but it's a very simple purpose. Ultimately, though, we know that beautiful scene doesn't stay that way. This is a beautiful artist rendering, Thomas Cole, of the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. A nice division right down the middle. To the right, you see the ideal world that God created. We spent some time with Steve talking about before Noah. And then we have the fall. And not that creation was tarnished or that was broken, but it reflects what man has become, what man has embraced. And it's that duality there, kind of captured in this image. And so, after this fall, man has now lost that position that he was trusted. He has been lowered, and he is cast out from the garden. And now we see a brand new concept introduced that has not been part of creation up to this point, and it's the idea of separation. Man made a choice, and because of that choice, there was division, and it had to be done. There's a critical detail in this scene where it talks about Adam and Eve and God coming to them to confront them. I'll touch on that detail at the very end. I'll try to tie it in. But be mindful and try to consider this scene of when they're being cast out and all the events that occurred. And then moving forward, before we get to the kingdom of priests, I'll make one claim regarding the rest of Scripture. Excuse me. And that is this, that from the rest of Scripture, from this page on, and all the ones up till Revelation, it's focused on restoring mankind to that original purpose that I stated earlier. Working alongside God, reigning with Him, and being near Him. Moving forward, going several centuries in advance, we skipped right over Adam's descendants, went right over the flood event, which Steve did a great job covering, went right past Abraham, and we're going to land with Moses. And we're going to start in chapter 19. So just for context, Israelites have successfully left Egypt. God has already provided for them on a few cases while they're in the wilderness and restored them and showed them His provision. And now we get to 19, which is covenant time. And so we'll start in the very first verse. Exodus 19. And on the first day of the third month, after the Israelites had left Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. And after they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did in Egypt, and how I carried you out on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possessions. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be to me, for me, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." These are the words that you are to speak to the Israelites. So Moses went and summoned the elders and the people and sat them before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. And the people all responded together, "We will do everything that the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, "I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking with you, and will always put their trust in you." Then Moses told the Lord that the people had said, and the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord, Yahweh, will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, 'Be careful and do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. They are to be stoned or shot with an arrow, but not a hand is to be laid on them. No person or animal shall be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they approach the mountain.'" Now, if you ask a Jew who with a very traditional mindset, what do they think of this scene? There's a lot of death, there's a lot of mystery, perhaps a lot of fear involved, but they see this as a wedding scene, which is a little odd for us. But this is an exchanging of vows. They're in under God's cloud, the chuppah, which is necessary for every good Jewish wedding. And so this is a very intimate moment. God's taken them away from a life of hardship, and he's about to propose to them. And he's expressing his vows. Notice that even though God is calling them to be a nation of priests, there is still this need for separation. And we even see examples here where there's heavy consequences to those who would casually approach God. You don't do that. And though the term is not used here, this is the first time Israel as a nation is introduced to the concept of God's holiness. And we'll talk more about that later, but he even addresses the fact that he's going to make them holy. And that's his intention for them. An important reminder that would probably help frame this context a little bit more is that while these people are ethnically Jewish, they are descendants of Abraham, they still remember their family lines and their history, they are culturally pagan. They were familiar with Egyptian priests and that system of worship and what that looked like. When they think gods, they think of images of carven things, and you see that that's not something that they get rid of for centuries. That Egypt never quite leaves the Israelites, even up to the time of exile. And so, God says that he was going to teach them how he wanted to be worshipped. Remember, before Moses even came, when they were crying out desperately in pain, wanting to be freed, they didn't even call to their God by name. And when Moses is asking God, when he's being assigned to go serve these people, God says, "This is my name," because they don't even know it. And Moses was asking how to identify God by. And so God carefully outlines everything that he wants to be worshipped. These are how you love me. This is how I'd like to be worshipped. This is what I think a priest looks like. This is how I want my house to be built. This is the kind of people I want and allowed there, and only at certain times and in certain ways. This is the kind of clothing that they should wear. This is the kind of practices that they should perform both outside and inside. It went from anything to the most minute article of clothing to just shaving your head. A priest, for example, could not pull this look off because there's always an inherent risk that I could cut myself. Then I am unclean. Priests could not do that. And all of these details were designed to reinforce for these people a principle of holiness, set apart, unique. Now, there's been a lot of, I've been blessed to be part of many classes that dealt with the principle of holiness and exploring that word and its origins and all the different use cases for it. Won't do that today. Just one element of holiness, and that's the idea of it's often paired with or associated with purity. And so another way to view purity is it's untouched, it's unstained, it's unblemished. Another one is that it's consisting of only one material. It's not mixed. It doesn't have multiple properties. It is unique and whole in one thing. So if I were to compare it to a precious metal like gold, and I say something is pure gold, it elevates the status and its worth. It is that much better because it is only consisting of one thing. But if I were to say this is pure uranium or plutonium, the connotation changes. And it's not because plutonium or uranium or this hazardous material is evil, it's not malicious, it has no ill intent. It is just an inherent property of something that has power and it needs to be respected in its own private place. And when it's handled, you don't do it casually. You wear the necessary protection and all the procedures that go along with that. As with any comparison, this does not do justice. There are several things that are flawed in this kind of analogy, but there's seeds of this I'd like to draw out moving forward when considering the way the priests interacted with God. So jumping back to God, again giving his people the law. We're not going to read all the laws, all 600 plus, but we will briefly dive into some of the practices dealing specifically with the priestly garments. And this is where hopefully we can draw some application for ourselves, particularly at the end. To do so, we'll jump ahead again to Exodus 28, for those who are using the Bibles. In Exodus chapter 28, read the first 5 verses. Have Aaron, your brother, brought to you from among the Israelites, along with his sons Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, so they may serve me as priest. Make garments for your brother Aaron to give him dignity and honor. Tell all the skilled workers to whom I have given wisdom in such matters, that they are to make garments to Aaron for his consecration, so that he may serve me as a priest. These are the garments that they are to make: a breastpiece, an ephod, a robe, a woven tunic, a turban, and a sash. They are to make these garments for your brother Aaron and his sons, so that they may serve me as priests. Have them use gold and blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and fine linen. And then when you look at the rest of the chapter, it really breaks down all those various elements, what they're composed of, what they should look like, even so far as talking about all the various gems, the precious gems, the ephod that would have the names of Israel, even down to the very seams of the robe at the bottom that would have pomegranates and figs elaborately designed. And by the end of it, this is what it would have most likely appeared. Little liberty with the artist rendering. But it was, as God explained, it was supposed to give Aaron honor and make him unique. There's also a warning repeated multiple times throughout this chapter that should Aaron or his sons fail to wear the proper attire, if they should not wear the things that God ordained and outlined, that they would die. And it was emphasized that this is because they are within God's presence. And I should note that the context of this only addresses activities that would take place within the courtyard and the holy place. This is not addressing the Holy of Holies or the Most Holy Place. For that, we'll go ahead and jump to Leviticus. And Leviticus 16, I'm going to read the first 4 verses. And the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron, who died while they approached the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come whenever he chooses into the most holy place behind the curtain in the front of the atonement cover on the ark, or else he will die. For I will appear in the cloud over the atonement cover. This is how Aaron is to enter the most holy place. He must first bring a bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He is to put on the sacred linen tunic, the linen undergarments next to his body. He is to tie the linen sash around him and put on linen turban. These are the sacred garments, so he must bathe himself with water before he puts them on." Remember, again, this is the holy of holy places. This is the innermost part of the tabernacle. This is where God's presence would reside. And the rest of the chapter really provides instruction on how the high priest would perform the necessary sacrifices, both for himself first, personally, and also for the nation as a whole. And for those who have studied Leviticus before, it's over the course of the years become one of my favorites. And if you look at chapter 16, you'll know that this is the heart of Leviticus. This is the very core of the document, both literally, it's in the center. And both halves of Leviticus on either side frame it in a nice mirror fashion. They repeat each other themes and thoughts. But Leviticus 16 is unique in that it focused solely on the Day of Atonement. And that's really the entire document's focus. It kind of hones in on this. It's the most important laws regarding God's people, and it only pertains to one man. So did you notice how Aaron was dressed in this occasion? So before, on the left, we have all the attire that he would wear when he's in the holy place or out in the courtyard, or presumably when he's going from his home, though most of the priestly wear was kept on site. But here, this is different. This is unique. Instead of all of this outward appearance, he would only have the undergarments of the linen tunic. And this was also kept on site, and there was multiple washing ceremonies. Anytime he would be going in, anytime he'd be coming out, anytime he'd be interacting with blood or a sacrifice, there's multiple washings, and multiple times he'd have to be donning this apparel. So before, even in the holy place, where other priests would be associated and working and handling the various implements of worship, and out in the courtyard, again, Aaron would be wearing the thing on the left, that attire. He was regal, he was decorative, he was very colorful and catching to the eye. He was meant to be impressive. That was the goal. But here, for one day out of the entire year, Aaron's not representing God to the people. He's now representing people to God. And the attire that's appropriate for that is what looks like a slave. Something that the Jews were very familiar with. Very low, common, classless man. And this scene beautifully showcases how God intended Israel as a whole nation to function. He desperately wanted them to look like Aaron in his proper attire, who looked royal and regal and stunning, to be gleaming royal ambassadors to demonstrate to the world at large his glory. That was his intent for them. And in private, when they're at home, when it's just them and it's talking amongst each other, they would realize, I'm still just this man on the right. There's nothing special about me. It's who I'm representing. I am an unworthy servant of a holy king. That's what his vision for his people were. Not just for themselves, not just for the priests and the Israelites, but for the world at large. They were to be the priests, to show the world God. However, his people, like us, repeatedly chose to elevate other things, nations, political parties, other gods, and even themselves over their Creator. They failed to be the priests that they were called to be. But the story didn't end there. We already talked a little bit in class about some of the promises that God gave and the prophecies that looked forward ahead. Started all the way back in Genesis, and it weaves its way all throughout Israel's history, talking about a seed, a prophet, a priest, a son, and a king who would come and bring hope and true restoration, bringing us to the time of Christ and his ultimate sacrifice and the events that followed. We're only going to look at one gospel account very briefly, jumping into Matthew 27, if you'd like to turn there. Again, in Matthew 27, starting in verse 45. And from noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing by heard this, they said, he is calling to Elijah. Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. And when Jesus had cried out in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. And at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke out open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. And when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, surely he was the Son of God. Finally, the true high priest, and we could do an entire sermon and lessons on Hebrews, just see Hebrews. The true high priest and the perfect lamb, both roles combined, came in once and for all to wash away the sins of the world. The true day of atonement had come. Not one day repeated every year, but one day and one day alone for all human history. And we see the tearing of the veil, that terrible, necessary separation that we've seen since the day of Adam and Eve's failing and their sin, is replaced now with an unrestrained, free access through his blood. And then mankind as a whole can now freely choose to become God's priests, accept that perfect sacrifice given on their behalf, and finally approach the Creator once more. We'll turn real briefly, this won't be on the slide, to 1 Peter chapter 2. Matt dealt with living stones. This is actually a passage that deals with that as well, some overlap. But I want to focus on Peter's observations of his audience and the fact that the priestly role never left and really changed. Starting in verse 1 of chapter 2. So put away all malice and deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander. Like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, that by it they may grow into salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good. As you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious, you yourselves, like living stones, are built up to a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. So the honor is for you who believe, but for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. They stumble because they disobey the word, as they were destined to do. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of the darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So we may now approach God. That separation has been removed, and we can freely come before him. But that still isn't the end of the story. The closeness that we enjoy today because of our King's sacrifice is still in part. We are not fully back to that original perfect state that we observed in the garden, that God had created, that he intended for us. Remember now that I mentioned I omitted or just breezed past a crucial detail that we were reading back in Genesis during the fall scene. If you go to chapter 3 and you're going through that terrible scene of when God's coming to confront them, we see a glimpse of the intimacy that was always destined for us, even if it's under sad circumstances. How does the text depict him? If you read verse 8, he was walking through the garden. There was zero separation between God and man. There was no need for written or recorded scripture. There was no need for prayer. There was no need for a mediator. We take this for granted because that's all we've ever known. This is the only way we've ever been able to interact with our King. But he was right there, in arm's reach at the beginning. That is the perfect state that we're looking forward to. No separations of any kind. We don't have to approach a king through special means and various practices. We'll simply get to walk beside him again. So, until then, on this side of eternity, how will you represent your king? We're in a season of year where traditionally people are more mindful of Christ, of Jesus, of the man. How are we going to use that opportunity? Will I be an obedient, kind, merciful ambassador who is confidently sharing and wearing a beautiful robe so that others can see I am bold in sharing who my king is and giving him the glory? Or when others look at me, will they only see a plain white tunic? I'm representing fellow man. There's nothing special about me or who I serve. And I can go by hidden and in peace. We get to decide what we wear. So, my calling to you is to be a priest and look forward to the day when we won't have that separation any longer. If you are struggling, need any help, and would like to have aid from the brethren here and assistance with that, whatever the case may be. If you are not a child of God, if you've not chosen that path and are not walking in holiness alongside your King, and wish to accept the Lord's invitation to be buried with Christ and raised as he did, whatever the case may be, please come forward as we stand and sing.